Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us for today's Lunch and Learn webinar. I'm Lou Vicenti from Organics Aotearoa, New Zealand, and today we are hosting a session with Christine and Mark from Biodynamics NZ. But before we kick off, just a little bit of housekeeping. For today's Lunch and Learn webinar, we'll be online for approximately 1 hour, and I'm recording the session, so please keep yourself on mute and pop any questions into the chat. We'll leave around 10 minutes at the end for a Q&A with our speakers. So in today's session, and in celebration of 100 years of biodynamics this year, we've invited Christine and Mark to come on and talk about how biodynamic practices can help you enhance your growing systems. So thank you both for joining us, Christine and Mark. Before we kick off into your session, into your presentation rather, shall we start by you telling us a little bit about yourselves and about Biodynamics NZ? And Christine, do you want to start?
Oh, thank you, Lou. Hi, everybody. I'm Christine Moginie. I live in Mangawhai, and currently I'm on the Biodynamic New Zealand Council with Mark and 4 other people. And we have some exciting things happening this year with 100 years of biodynamics. So this is a lovely opportunity to try and sort of spread that with far and wide. I've been practicing, I suppose, biodynamics for about 30 odd years, initially in Australia with Brian Keats and Hamish Mackay, and also Lynette West. We used to have about 10 years worth of practical workshops at my property in Mittagong, and I came across biodynamics when I did the orientation course in anthroposophy in Sydney in 1983. So prior to that, I suppose my gardening and farming kind of background via my mother was something that influenced me a lot. We used to go to the family farm in Mangaweka when we were kids. Mum would drive for 12 hours in the Anglia to take us down there for the August school holidays, which was only 3 terms every year, basically. And that was to a sheep farm, you know, with rivers and all sorts of things. It was 6 cousins to run around instead of sitting in Auckland. So that was a real highlight for me. And I ended up buying an old 100-year-old farmhouse in Mittagong in Australia, where I lived for 15 years. So when I came back to New Zealand in 2007, I ended up teaching some biodynamic courses based on the fantastic course that I learned with Lynette West before I left Australia at Selwyn College, Adult Education Centre, well, through school in Auckland. And I also had Vortex Creative Wellbeing Centre that I started in Ellerslie. I had a community garden there and used to, encourage people to come along and learn about growing food in their own backyards. So predominantly my experience is home gardens, particularly flowers, herbs, vegetables. I had to build a relationship to. So that's kind of me, I suppose.
Over to you, Mark.
I've just recently sort of joined council. It feels less recent somehow, but yeah, probably the latest batch of additions. So my background, I went to the Taikura Rudolf Steiner School in Hastings, and that's where I did my primary education. Then spent some time in Australia and in Germany and in London, and then back to New Zealand and around and around. So I'm a naturopath and medical herbalist by main trade, and also wear many other hats. So yeah, just recently purchased a block of land after having trained in herbal medicine, and so we're expanding that into obviously medicinal herb growing. And I'm practicing medical astrologer and the gearist. So we use, basically it's the alchemy of the plant kingdom. So we take sort of 3 principles of the plant and separate them, and then refine each of them, and then bring them back together to make it a more potent herbal medicine than otherwise is available. So there's a lot more work in it, a lot of celestial timings involved, rather than just doing this now. So mostly it's based on timings and things like that. So yeah, in the light of timing and just not aware of how much we've got, we might just kick over and just give you a brief overview of the association and what we've got to offer you.
Hey, Mark, can I just say one thing? Margaret's saying she's having a little trouble hearing you.
Okay, I'll try.
Is there any way we could
add into the...
increase your volume slightly?
Yeah.
Thanks.
I'll just try, just because I'm screen sharing, it might have a difficulty. 1 second. It does this. That should be better. Is that a little bit better?
Yeah, that sounds better.
Much better?
Yeah.
Great. Okay.
Yeah. Thanks.
No worries. So, yeah, Biodynamics New Zealand. So our purpose is to promote the development of, physical health, spiritual well-being of people in New Zealand, and to, guide and safeguard the biodynamic approach to agriculture in general, across many diverse areas. So it is part of organics as well, if that makes sense. It's just that there's a little bit more involved sometimes. A lot of that is celestial, which we will get into, but it's based on the work of Dr. Rudolf Steiner, when he presented a bunch of lectures in 1924. And so we're actually the 100-year anniversary this year of those lectures. So it's quite exciting for the association. So we're all about observing rhythms and things like that as we're working and as we're farming or gardening. One of the quotes that I quite like is that there aren't no better fertilizer for the land as the farmer's footprints. And it's so true, and of gardeners in general, so much as observation and actually just seeing what is out there and what's going on, and then detailing how we respond to that. So that hopefully gives a little bit of insight into what is biodynamics and sort of like a brief overview. But very specifically, we have a concept in biodynamics, which is a farm organism. So if you think about what a farm is, a lot of people will go to a lot of places, depending on, what your definition of a farm is. It might just be a chicken farm. It might be beef farm, it might be market garden. But then if we look at what is an organism, that's quite broad. I mean, we could be thinking of a single cell organism. We could be thinking of a complex multi-cell organism, the human being, all sorts of things can be organism, but it's about what is the connection between those things. And so one of the things that we strive for in biodynamics is getting a nice equilibrium and treating the farm as a farm organism. So if I didn't have a pair of lungs, I might find it quite difficult to function as a whole organism. So we try and find those areas that the farm organism might be lacking and provide support to that where we can, and use our intuition and also our observations to key into what those things might be. So hopefully everyone is familiar with the soil food web. It's a concept that's pretty widespread, but Dr. Elaine Ingham has done some wonderful work on that. But it's basically this concept of the whole soil microbiota and everything, something eats something else. It's not a food chain so much as it is a food web. And in that aspect, if we're aware of a food web going on under the soil, it sort of raises the question, what's going on above the soil? So we're very familiar what's in our hemisphere, in our sphere of influence, as it were, on the farm. We have the seasons and we have the sun rising and we can observe things. But there are large astrological bodies and constellations and things that is almost like a soil food web, but astrally and astrologically and celestially, is kind of a way that I tried to sort of get it across as a concept. And so what biodynamics does, which probably separates it or distinguishes it a little bit, I suppose is probably a better word, from organics, is Rudolf Steiner gave us a whole bunch of preparations where we take a substance and then usually a sheath, and they're combined together and a transformation occurs. There's a few ways of looking at it. If we want to be purely physical about it, we know that, you know, composting is great and there's a transformation that takes place. We build humus, etc. But with biodynamics, there's also that second part of the picture that we like to take into account with what's going on celestially. So how can we incorporate that into what we're doing? So usually, if people have heard things about biodynamics, the first thing people hear is, oh, cow horns, cow horns, cow horns. So rightly so, Christine's got one here. So this is actually a cow's horn, and we can tell it's a cow's horn. Do you want to take us through, Christine, how we can know that that one's from a cow?
The cows actually have a spiral in the horn, the steer, and the cow horn has like a solid tip. And often, I mean, this, you can tell how old the cow is by the carving rings. This one doesn't have them so obviously shown. Sorry, got to hold them in the right spot. But fresh cow manure from a lactating cow, ideally, because of course she's the most juicy life force machine, if you want to think about her as a machine, animal being on the planet, is actually put into the cow horn, usually in autumn, and buried in the ground, covered over with soil through winter. And in spring, it's dug up and it turns into, try and show you, this beautiful, rich, colloidal, humus-like, full of life forces, not just physical life forces, but also the cosmic forces that have been digested over the winter, and then it's stirred in water for an hour, vortexing it, which, if you have any understanding of homeopathy, means that you're enhancing the life forces gazillion-fold, and then it's sprayed out on the land in the afternoon in a descending moon phase, because you want to actually activate all the microbacterial enzymes, fungi, life forms, etc. in the soil, and that keeps going throughout the year. Obviously, we can't see what's under the soil very easily, but certainly when you've put out the 500, within 3 days you can notice quite obviously that all your plants are standing up much straighter, much firmer. It strengthens all aspects of the plant. And if you have animals, then obviously that effect works there as well. So the vortexing, which I'll try and demonstrate here, means that you are stirring to create a vortex for a couple of minutes. Then you work in the opposite direction. So it doesn't happen in a glass so much, but in a bucket where you're stirring, you get quite a lot of splash and chaos. So you're interrupting that rhythm, and you just keep doing this for an hour. The water then becomes silky and smooth, and you start to see the pulsing of the vortexes the longer you do it. So you don't just drop the 500 in the water, you dissolve it, otherwise you end up with lots of bits at the bottom. And then when you spray it out, ideally, I just found one at Bed Bath & Beyond to replace my old one. If you can use a natural hearth brush, and that is flicked out using a lemniscate figure of 8 gesture all over your land. You don't need to put it on every single plant, you're just broadcasting it. So that is how we tend to work with the 500. And you'll find over time that it starts to replace, if you've been using chemicals or even anything like seaweed or compost teas and so forth, that the soil starts to achieve a nice harmonious balance, and you need less and less the longer you work with the 500. Quite a magic process, because it absorbs all these cosmic forces that Mark was talking about. And like the cow, which has 4 stomachs, it is digested in a way that nothing else really gets digested, using the horn cosmic forces, or formative forces, they're called. You know, cows are very moist. Everything sort of happens through the saliva aspect of the head, which is why it's lovely if you can find cows with horns on, that they have. There has been research that says that the meat and the milk is quite different on a biodynamic farm from cows that do have horns. So this is digested herbages that comes out, as we know, as black gold the other end, and that is what is used in the horns.
So the other half of that picture, if that's the grounding aspect of the 500, the next is actually 501. So we use the horns again. So this time we're dealing with a clear quartz. I happened to actually have one with me today, which was quite surprising in my pocket. Christine's got one there, and I'm actually at a friend's place, so we've decided to bring hers along as well, just to join us as we talk about 501. So what we do is we actually take the clear quartz crystals and crush them down and grind them into a fine, fine, fine powder, which is then mixed with water and makes a paste which we put back into the horns, and in the same way as the 500, except this time it's the spring and summer influences which they're drawing in. So once it comes out of the horns, it's a completely transformed substance again. So whereas 500, you'd flick it out with a brush, with the 501, we're dealing with the atmosphere as well. So we usually use the backpack sprayer, and we've just done ours recently. It's a nice exercise for you at dawn, first thing in the morning. So we start stirring an hour before the sun comes up. And then once dawn hits, we actually just walk around with a backpack sprayer and spray it into the atmosphere. And again, that sort of helps balance the other side to that picture as well. So they're sort of working on 2 separate polarities. So those are the field preparations, so 501 and 500. Now everyone, oh, sorry, yeah, Christine.
Can I just say one more thing about that, Mark? So what you're achieving with the 501 is that you're bringing in that archetypal form of whatever it is that you're growing. So if it's fruit or olives or market garden, or you've got animals, and so that is basically being drawn together to connect with all those enlivened life forces in the soil. So it's completing that. I always like to think of it as a lemnis gate. The important thing is that if you don't do it early in the morning, because sometimes vignerons do spray during the day, that it can burn the leaves, but it is also very helpful for your mildews and your some things like black spot. But you need to have put out at least 2 lots of 500 first before you use 501. And I have actually changed the form, colour and perfume of a couple of plants when I've just randomly come home from a workshop and put it out. So while it seems like there's not going to be a lot of effect, there really is. And so once again, you have to be a little aware of these rhythms, because of course you can bring in, out of your enthusiasm, influences that your environment, your garden or your farm, isn't quite ready to receive.
Okay. So the next set of preparations numerically as we go up. So hopefully everyone's made at least 1 compost heap. If not, we've got plenty of advice on how we can build a good one, and then a great one, and then an excellent one, and then a biodynamic one. So there's a million ways to quote unquote skin a cat. So however you make compost is the way you make compost, but we have a set of preparations. So again, it's matching that botanical form with usually an animal sheath most of the time. So 502 is yarrow, and that's associated with the planet Venus. So here's some yarrow growing on our farm, and we don't have sag bladder pictured, but I'll quickly go through them just so you know that it is the yarrow that usually grows on the side of the road. It's, differentiate it from cow parsley. That's one that might crop up quite a bit, but the way you know you've got the right leaf is it's just millefolium, or millions of leaves, is the long leaf with lots of jagged edges on there. So yarrow is for Venus. So what we do is we have a number of preparations. I'll just give you an overview first, which then, once the compost heap is created, we place into the finished compost heap. And there is a slight twist to one at the end. So the next one, which is German chamomile, which actually has a wonderful blue essential oil. If you ever are privileged enough to look at that, it's a wonderful, wonderful oil. It's associated with mercury, and this time we place it in a cow's intestine sheath. So you can see there, Christine's just holding up some finished 503. So it comes out looking completely different to the source material. That alchemy reaction that takes place between that sheath and the influences, the time that it's put down, they all contribute to giving these unique properties. 504 is greater nettle, stinging nettle. So not the one that you often see in sheep paddocks, but the one which has a broader leaf, more seen in hedgerows in England and that kind of thing. We do have it here, which is fantastic. You just need to differentiate that one out from the lesser nettle. So just make sure you've got the right one there. So we've got the Latin name, it's Urtica dioica. This one doesn't have a sheath per se. So this one's just either placed into a clay tile, the drainage tiles, or sometimes it's placed between peat. Sometimes it's just placed directly in the earth. Different people make this one different ways. Then we've got oak bark. So this doesn't actually harm the tree. If there's a branch that needs pruning, so we just use the outer part of the bark, or part sometimes of the main trunk, and it's the outer part is actually rasped off. And this one's associated with the moon and is placed into the head of a domesticated animal, like a cow or a sheep usually. And then that's placed into the a situation that's kind of swamp-like, marsh-like. It's usually placed in perhaps, say, like a barrel where we put in some leaf litter and some soil and things like that, and then just regularly top it up with water to create those anaerobic kind of conditions. Then 506, which is associated with Jupiter, is dandelion, or Taraxacum officinale. So this time it's placed into the mesentery, so that's all around this area, the central stomach kind of area of the cow, and it's stitched up. And yeah, so you'll notice they're looking all a lot like coffee grounds, which is quite amazing for something which does take a year, sometimes 2 years, things, depending on which preparation you're making. And then 507 is valerian. So this is another vegan preparation. So this is just either the infused water or juice concentrated of the flowers of the valerian plant. So not the root, which is usually used in herbal medicine. So this time we're using the flowers. The roots smell like stinky, cheesy socks, if you've ever worked with this plant, and the aroma from the bottoms could not be anything but the exact opposite. They are absolutely intoxicating. It's a wonderful smell associated with Saturn. And so, yeah, we use this one as a liquid. So Christine demonstrated the vortexing and stirring. So this one is stirred for 20 minutes, 10, some 10, some 20. And then that's placed into the last hole of the compost heap. And then we, like with the 500, we sprinkle out over the top of the compost heap to just put a nice warming blanket and tuck it in. And all of those preparations work together to kind of, again, pulling in with their archetypes and guide the decomposition of that organic matter. in such a way that you're not just creating a great compost, it's an excellent compost. And the compost has this kind of colloidal, like very humus rich properties that you can feel. If your soil's too clay and you add a little bit of biodynamic compost, all of a sudden it's, you know, more balanced. And the same with sand. It just provides what it needs. It acts a bit like an adaptogen, kind of in that way. It provides the soil what it needs, either which way. And there is one other preparation which isn't included in the compost preparations, which is equisetum or horsetail, field horsetail, which is also associated with satin. This time we use the aerial parts, but we make a decoction, so like a really strong tea. So it's half an hour boiled, or as a fermented tea. So that's again diluted and stirred and placed out. This plays a big role with mediating that fungal dimension. So not excluding it, but where the fungi is maybe coming up a little too high, we'll just push it back to the ground. I've got some ideas on using this with mushrooms myself, and which will be interesting, but that's jumping a bit ahead. But yeah, so this is very much associated with a fungal dynamic. So any excess of fungi, we can, yeah, try and push that back down. So now maybe, would you like to add anything, Christine? Yeah.
Sure. I just also want to mention that there's one other thing apart from the 500 and the 501, which I don't think we put a slide in for, which is the cowpat pit.
Oh, yes, thank you.
And so that is something that people can easily make. I know it looks very much like the 500, but it is perhaps a little bit finer, a little more crumbly. And it's, you dig a pit in the ground, kind of about halfway up, not to your knee, about mid-calf, and ideally line it with bricks, or you can use half a wine barrel or a big terracotta pot that you smash the bottom out of so that it has access to the soil. And once again, this is turned and made into a new substance. So you have cow manure, fresh cow manure, ideally lactating cow, but sometimes you can't, so whatever you can get. Ideally, checking that there hasn't been any sort of additives given to the cow in terms of, you know, sort of, can't think of the name, what's it called? Drenches. So, you know, you want it as natural as possible, and it's turned either by hand or with a spade. We use a wheelbarrow because it's easier when it's up higher. Some people just put a tarp on the ground and you just keep turning it and turning it like you do when you're sort of baking sourdough bread. And you add a small amount of very finely crushed eggshells to bring in the calcium aspect, and you also add basalt rock dust to bring your minerals in. And so this is stirred, turned for an hour, and then put into the pit. And the compost preparations are added the same as they are for a compost, with the valerian poured over the top to sort of put it all nicely to sleep. We cover ours with a damp coffee sacks so that it can still breathe, and then put well, I use a piece of tin, but you can have a piece of wood that you put on an angle to direct the water off, and it stays for anywhere between 3 to 6 months, sometimes before it turns. So initially it goes in very green, but as you can see from this, it turns out as beautiful, rich, colloidal, humusy substance that you can use and stir for a shorter length of time. Peter Backus reckons 10 minutes, where I learnt with Lynette 20 minutes, and you stir and put out. And so you can broadcast it, but you can also add it to, you know, like water it into all your vegetables and your plants. You can use it to encourage root growth. You can soak your seeds in it first to give them a good burst. Lots of people soak their garlic and their potatoes in it to help against rust, but also to strengthen before you put it out. And you can actually sprinkle small amounts around in your pot plants if you only have pot plants, and that can really help to mediate between these cosmic formative forces and these life forces in the soil and the earth. So it kind of is I often think about it as the sort of meeting point or the bridge between the 501 and the 500. And that's your sort of three main preparations, often the easiest to start making because it doesn't take that long, and it means then you've got a ready supply of even better than compost sometimes in your garden. So the zodiac and moon rhythms, obviously, we're starting to talk about the less seen aspects of life. And so I'm going to invite you to sort of pay attention to this atmosphere that we're in at the moment, this so-called space that surrounds us, that we live in every second of every minute of every hour of every day of our lives. And if you're anything like me, when I first started, didn't pay any attention to. But if we could, like people used to be able to, see this so-called atmosphere, empty space, we'll realize it isn't empty at all. It's full of life forces, full of formative forces. And this more unseen realm is what really influences and supports the forms that we much more easily see, that we call plants or animals or even crystals, and also ourselves. So if we bring this back to ourselves and we just simply think about what happens when we breathe in and what we breathe out, and ask that question, what is it that we're breathing in? What is it that we're breathing out? And of course, we've learnt we can call it, CO2 and carbon, etc. But what is it? What is it that nourishes us? What is it that we actually imbue and change and transform as we eat food? And so we can loosely call these formative forces or life forces. And Steiner really brought this in a really beautiful way, because it's like encouraging us to look at these rhythms in our everyday life. Even a simple thing like when you first wake up in the morning and before you open your eyes, just observing how you can start to perceive what sometimes is called prana, or moving little light bodies in the atmosphere, that this is what lives in this world. And we often see it before we open our eyes because, of course, as soon as light comes in, we can't see it anymore. The same way during the day, we know the planets and the constellations and are there, but we can't see them because light is stopping us from seeing them. So we go out at night and we can see the moon in her journey from new moon to waxing to waning to full moon. And we can, if we want to, look further to the planets and notice where they are moving to. And so in this moon's journey, as she waxes and wanes once a month, we have the possibility for more light. By the time it gets to full, we have almost 12 hours of added life. And so that's going to stimulate plants, it's going to stimulate the animals. And we know as women, we have a monthly cycle, which we can easily pay attention to. Men also have a monthly cycle, which is perhaps a little harder to pay attention to, but most women will know what their partners, if they have male partners, cycles are like. So just starting to pay attention to this moon cycle is already something that you can learn a lot about. It doesn't rise in the same place each day as the seasons move. It goes further north and comes back further south. And that's often what we call summer and winter, moving through autumn and spring. And going back to that lovely spiral curve, it changes position every single month. So when it's closest to the earth, obviously the influences are stronger. And Brian says it's not the moon creating the tides, it's affecting the atmosphere that then affects all the watery substances of everything. Our blood, the magna in the, in the earth, the sap rising in plants, obviously life cycles, in animals, and you can utilize these obviously for when you want to sort of mate your bulls and your cows and your sheep or your chickens or your whatevers, and start to become aware of that. So the thing that people sometimes struggle with in the beginning is that while you've got this waxing, waning journey going on, that's perhaps we're more familiar with, because the moon moves, ideally, you kind of look at it from almost midday overhead in its highest ascending phase, it will gradually start descending. It doesn't go right to the horizon. It doesn't even really go to 45 degrees, but you'll notice as it's in its descending phase that it's kind of moving, let's just call it 45 degrees away from overhead. And then it starts coming back again till when it is overhead, it's in its highest ascending phase. And this, you can sit and you can watch every day a particular plant and you can notice what's happening in that plant. If it's in its descending phase, it's working more with the roots and the lower part of the plant. And that's where you often can see that sort of more upright growth, I suppose, and strengthening, you know, your carrots and so forth, you would dig up or plant out around a descending earth phase with the moon. I'll come to that in a minute. With the ascending, it's working more in the top part of the plant, perhaps slightly more with photosynthesis, but you know, when I don't want to go into too much of that, but just that you can observe that sometimes there's a lot more activity in the flowering, seeding, fruiting aspect of the plant. And if you pick it, plant things to do with fruit trees or fruit, in those phases, you'll find that the flavour and the form and the life forces obviously are enhanced by just simply paying attention to two rhythms of the moon. And that'll keep you going for several years. But there are other aspects that play in, and this is perhaps, you know, for beginners, a little bit harder to get your head around. But if you've had an astrology chart done, which many people have, you'll be familiar with the zodiac names. In Biodynamics, we work with the sidereal school of thought, we can say. And so we tend to use the ram, the bull, the twins, the crab, the lion, the virgin, the scales, the scorpion, the archer, the goat, the waterman, and the fish aspects, because there's already about a 2-week difference to the tropical and Placidus astrological view of what's going on in the world. This is based on looking through the telescope. This is what I see astronomically in the sky. And I can see the moon is in front of Aries, for example, and I can notice that Saturn's over here and wherever it is, and you need a telescope for that, but Venus and Mars and Jupiter are obviously, being the closer planets, they are easier to see. They're divided into what we would call elements, so the fire elements, the water elements, and the air elements, and the earth elements. And so you have the different influences there on the plants again, which perhaps are more subtle, but at the same time you can start to notice this. So for your earthly constellations, you've got the bull, the Virgo, and the goat. And as I said, they will work more with the rooting and the seed aspect, planting out, you know, seeds that you're going to harvest the roots, you know, like beetroot, carrots, parsnips, for example. When the moon is in front of the water zodiac, you've got your fishes, the crab, and the scorpion. And so they're working more with the leafy plants, if you're working with plants. So your things like your silver beets and maybe some of your herbs, anything where you're harvesting the leafy part of the plant. And you'll notice that in any plant that the leaf aspect will be sort of more enhanced once you start your observation. When they're in front of the airy constellations, you've got your scales, your twins, and the waterman, and so that works more with the flowering aspect. So the colour, the shape, the perfume. Obviously, if you're growing flowers or you're picking the herbs, like the valerian flowers or your yarrow flowers, then that's the time that you would start to look at where the moon is in front of the air signs. And then when it comes to the fire signs, we've got the archer, the ram, and the lion. And so this is more to do with the seeding, fruiting influences. If you were to go and pick a plum off your tree, for example, it might, interesting to taste test, taste different to if you chose to pick it in an air or a water or a root day, just for the sake of playing around and experimenting. Could go, some people have experimented with preserving as well, preserving fruits and vegetables and so forth, flowers, making oils, facial cosmetics, etc. on different days. And Maria Thun spent a lot of time years ago as one of the sort of matriarchs of BD doing experiments every day to notice what the influences were. And it can be fun to plant things on different days and notice what the difference is. I did forget to mention the perigee and the apogee with the moon. So apogee is when the moon is further away from the earth. And so while some people work with weather, because you can do that as well, we won't go there today, but the influence, is quite substantial. As you can see, you've got sort of almost 500,000 kilometres movement here. And so the influences will not be as intense as when it's perigee. And often if that coincides with a node, I won't go into that today, which is when the moon crosses the ecliptic and the equator, etc., then that will actually increase, I suppose, the intensity of what's happening with the waxing waning moon, and depends very much in its north-south movement. So that's three rhythms to look at there. So if we go to the preparations, obviously they grow, they have certain influences, and we can also look at what they create in the soil. Back in 1924, there were no Bunnings and Kings and Palmer's plant barns for people to go to buy their plants, and not a lot of chemicals were being used in those days, although the farmers noticed that the soil was, already sort of starting to lose a lot of its biological activity. And so if you think you're on a farm, Steiner, I imagine, would have looked around and looked at what was actually growing there. And the interesting thing is these plants grow pretty much everywhere around the world. And each of them has a, what we would call, if we were to do periodic table, it has a particular influence. And so your yarrow will help to activate potassium in your soil. So you can play around with these things and just think about them. And Sophia Montefiore has put together these beautiful cards with the actual planetary seals behind them, another conversation, but with looking at all aspects of the plant, what they're used for. In us, they work with the kidneys. And so, we can actually sort of have yarrow as a tea to help us with our kidneys, and it works with the metal of copper. Interestingly, I'm taking Achillea comp at the moment, one of the Weleda medicines for varicose veins. So, just going back to the question that many people asked of why did Steiner go 500, 501, 502, etc., that all the medicines that were made by Bala for human consumption was up to 499 remedies. And these are, as I like to think of them, remedies for healing the earth. So they already grow there. You can simply just pull them out if they're too much and lay them on the soil, and those particular qualities will still help and be digested in the soil. Or you can work with the actual BD preparations. So 503 is influenced by Mercury and the lungs in us, in the plant, and the whole of the environment. And its metal obviously is Mercury. And I'm looking at my little chart here just to make sure I get these right. So it works with that sulfur-calcium relationship. You can investigate this a little bit more for yourself, but just time-wise, I'll move on. And then with nettle, the planetary influence is Mars. It works with our heart and it works with iron. And so nettle obviously has good benefits. You know, if you're pregnant or your animals are pregnant, you know, you could actually look at utilizing or making a nettle tea. We all know that one. And the stinging nettle works particularly with the formic acid as well. So, you know, you can start to sort of look around if you've had soil tests done, what your soil is lacking. And here you've already got what are sadly called weeds, in a way, not weeds. I suspect pharmaceutical companies have decided to call them weeds so they can promote their nasty alternatives, but they're wonderful plants. The oak bark, as Mark mentioned, you scrape off gently and you don't hurt the tree. It's affected by the moon. It has a strong influence. The moon works on the reproductive system, and its metal is silver. In the anthroposophical medicines, often metals are added to these herbal substances as well, so they can have an added benefit. And the oak bark works particularly with calcium. So then 506, we've got the dandelion, influenced by Jupiter in particular, works on the liver. Its metal is tin, and that works particularly with the silicic acid in the soil. So, you know, lots of people go, you know, spray and walk away, the old kind of, you know, TV ads we've had for years, but dandelion's remarkable. It's a great coffee alternative. All parts of it can be used, and so you want to encourage it in your garden. Also, just want to mention any of these with deep tap roots are really helpful for helping keep the soil open with excessive water like we had last year, and that helps any plants. So if it's growing around a particular plant, you know, before you dig it out, if you decide you don't want it or you want to use it, just think about what is it's doing for the soil. And a suggestion also is, if you are digging any of these plants out, make sure you put something back in, because basically you've opened up the soil, you've cut it, you're creating an opportunity for dis-ease to occur. So replace it with something else. And then valerian, its planet is Saturn, works with the spleen, metal is lead, and that works more with your phosphorus sort of aspect in the soil. And it has that sleepy ability. We know that we can have valerian to help us sleep if we want to. What else do we need? I think that's it. So yeah, just zoom on time-wise from there.
Yeah, just because in case we've got any questions or things like that. Yeah, so is it question time? Do we have time for questions?
Yeah, of course. Has anybody got any questions for Christine or Mark based on what they've heard so far? I just want to comment on those illustrations. They are really beautiful.
Yeah, they are absolutely wonderful.
I'll put a link to the artist in the chat if anyone's interested.
Yeah, we're going to have our cards available on the website shortly, so we do have a few packs of those.
Beautiful. Tim's asking, I'd like to ask about BD preps being added to larger composts. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on that?
My personal thought, so from the original lectures, if you go back, a little goes a long way. So Steiner's original suggestion was that a small pinch would be enough to treat a compost pile heap as large as a house. So thinking back to then how large houses may have been. And, you know, what's a pinch and what's a house, it becomes very, you know, open to interpretation. Demeter standards, obviously, like with any certification, theirs is, I believe, it's 1 gram per 5 cube.
Yeah, that makes it easy to understand.
And also you can also add more than one set to a very large compost, and
Yes.
that would be, you know, something to sort of work out how big is your compost that you're making, how many sets do you need.
Okay. Anna's asking, is the BD 502 flower also known as carrot weed?
No.
No.
It's different.
502. Yeah, that's the cow parsley carrot weed one, which is its lookalike. So the best way to do is just to have a look at the leaf. The leaf of this is very soft, very billowy, very fluffy, almost like a giant eyelash is probably how I'd best describe it. And the umbel is flat, so the top of the flower is like this, whereas the carrot weed is slightly domed. Like that is usually the best way to tell those two apart.
And the smell's different as well. Yeah. So you can tell by the smell. Definitely the taste, if you want to taste it.
We've got Brian Buller from Fiji. He's asking, is there anyone here making preparations?
Yeah, well, I'm hopefully about to start taking over and helping out Chris Hull, who's been making the preparations in Hawke's Bay for the association for the past, goodness, as long as I know.
Yeah.
And Christine, you'll also make the preparations?
I actually don't, because at the moment I have made them before. Sue Hoskin does make them down in Central Otago, and a lot of the vignerons do make them, but and Rachel Pomeroy makes them. So basically the best way to get them is through the Biodynamic Association, because they're certified and we know where they've come from, and we can, vouch that they're good. And so you just need to join up on the website. It's $54 for a membership, digital membership, or $119 per year. And you can buy the preparations. You get the magazine, you get the calendar as well, which gives you a lot of the information. You get to come to the cultivating conversations once a month where you can ask questions, and we're in the process of linking people up to regional groups so that you can find people closest to you to sort of do this.
I actually have a quick question personally. And I wanted to ask you, what advice would you have for someone who was just wanting to get started, like easy ways to get into biodynamics if they have never tried it before?
Join the association. Come and join it. We're more than happy to talk. I'm constantly responding to emails, which is good. It's good. And we're, like you say, we're trying to pair people up, and I'd like to look at a kind of a mentoring program and how that works. But when you do sign up, we send out a new member pack. So you'll get a back issue of Harvest magazine, and there's always interesting articles in there, but you also get a members welcome pack, which has in it all of the information that's in these slides in elaborate detail. We're looking at improving that as well, but we've also got the library. So the library currently resides with me in Hawke's Bay. So if you're placing an order for your preparations, why not just lend from the library and then get a book in there as well, and you can have some time to read up, because some of these books are very rare and difficult to find. Some of them are very common, but it's we're here as a community as well to support everyone. But the best place to start would be to join, get access to those preparations. You're more than welcome to also contact me directly and not join, because we're not gatekeeping anything at all. This is free for everyone to use. This is to get out there. But start off with 500 and your CPP, and just get the preparations out. They need to get out, and they need to get into circulation and usage so that they can start to develop your garden organism, your farm organism, and then hopefully that cell can tip to the cell next to it, and it can start to proliferate and communicate in that way.
Great advice.
Organically.
And from memory as well, I think you have a bunch of courses on your website that are available to buy. I think you
Yes,
did
yes,
some.
we do. So lots of we've got
link up
previous
on the
webinars
chat.
and cultivating conversations, things like that. We've also got for 100 years, because it is very exciting, at Taruna this year. So 100 years since the lectures were given on the agriculture course. So it is during Organic Week, the 1st to 7th of May. So it's just something to bear in mind if you do have things planned for Organic Week. But I'll tell you the workaround now is you join with your membership for digital membership, and then you can get your members discount on your ticket as well if you wanted to come in person to the conference. We're more than happy for people to exploit that loophole.
I just might run through a few more quick questions from the chat. Tim's asking, what demand is there for biodynamic compost from larger viticulture and agriculture organisations? Are you seeing more demand?
I would say, in general, from my perspective, just starting up, if I could have had access to biodynamic compost that had been made at commercial scale, that was available, and you could charge through the teeth for it, that is exactly what is being done. A lot of Elaine Ingham's graduates and things like that are incorporating the biodynamics into the already supercharged, soil food web kind of compost. So I think the market is there for someone if they have the ability to do that. And if they are interested in doing that, please do contact me because we will definitely help you through that.
Right.
And there also are people in different areas that do make compost for people. The difficulty is, of course, it can't be sold to, Bunnings or Kings or something like that and sit around in plastic bags. But Chaos Springs near Waiheke, they make a lot of compost. I know Sue does through their kind of community garden, and there's probably lots of other people as well. But if somebody did want to start that up as a business, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. Claire Bleakey's asking, regarding the organic bill, is the Biodynamic Association a third member group?
We are a member group, yes, and have been for as long as, initially Soil and Health and the Biodynamic Farming and Gardening Association sort of started up, not sure exactly date, 1945 or something, or maybe even earlier, working together, and then separated out, but we're in constant connection. And ideally, it would be wonderful to, as I mentioned to you, Lou, earlier, to be able to have a hui where we could sort of look at organics and permaculture and Hua Parakore and no digs and food forests, etc., and how we could all work together, to sort of strengthen this whole, preferred way of farming and gardening that works with nature, not against it. It's just a question of people to go to everything. There's not very many of us.
Your event in May looks fantastic, and we highly advise you getting tickets and going along. It being the 100-year celebration, it would be really worthwhile. Great for connecting, as you said, the soil and the social side of things. It looks fantastic. So I will send a mailer out early next week with a recording of this webinar, and we'll put a link to the Biodynamic membership and the event and everything else in there, so you can see for yourself and have a deeper look. But for now, that's 1 o'clock. So I want to say a really big thank you to Christine and Mark for coming along and your time and your energy. That was a really wonderful session. I learned a lot, and I hope you all did too. And thank you to the audience, for everyone, for coming along and asking your questions. And if there's anything else you want to learn about, please do let me know, and we can organise one of these lunch and learn sessions for you too. So just any final words for Christine and Mark before we go?
Just if we didn't answer all the questions, please feel free to email Mark or I. It's either mark@biodynamic.org.nz or christine@biodynamic.org.nz, and we're really happy to answer any questions from anyone. So thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Wonderful. Thanks everyone for coming, and we see you this time next month.